Welcome, everybody. My name is Victoria Vesna, and as the Undersecretary of the Bureau of Communications Beyond the Corporeal, I'm very, very pleased to announce that Randall Packer has joined us here on his tour to announce the 10,000 Acts of Artistic Mediation. This mediation effort is intended to mobilize the artistic forces in the nation in the anticipation of the national election in 2004. The Secretary will also discuss the recent activation of a new artist-driven political party, the Experimental Party, the Party of Experimentation, in the Department's effort to bring the artist's message to center stage of the political process. The Experimental Party intends to recruit, support, and coordinate viable artists to celebrate the universal spirit of collective expression, to seek volunteers to help speak oracular truths, and the most radically liberating critique of reason, and to engage students in the act of appropriation through art and polemic, manifesto and demonstration, love and politics. Calling him a man of great integrity, a man of great judgment, and a man who knows the arts, President George W. Bush announced his decision to nominate Randall M. Packer to serve as Secretary of the United States Department of Art and Technology on November 12, 2001. Upon confirmation by the Senate, Packer pledged to renew the war on cultural poverty, reduce the incidence of one-way exchange of information between an active agent and passive recipient, and combat discrimination so no American feels outside the field of aesthetic inquiry in the contemporary media arts. Tonight we will have two of our students act in this introduction of 10,000 Acts of Mediation. The first introduction will be by Tenzin, and the second introduction by Dominic. After that, we will see a promotional video from the U.S. Department of Art and Technology, and then finally the Secretary will honor us with his speech, which is finally followed by a question and answer and dialogue with the students in particular. So please help give a warm welcome to Randall Packer, Tenzin, and Dominic.
Hello. Hi, my name is Tenzin Wangchuk. I'm a third year at UCLA Design Media Arts. I wish we could all be happy, but we aren't. Open your eyes, know the facts. Ignorance is not bliss. Sometimes I ask myself, what can we do? What can I do? I sound selfish, self-indulgent, self-defensive, and self-realization. Realizing that there's more to life than this couch potato, sheltered, whatever man lifestyle. Let's get off our asses and make a difference. Start small, start big, just start. Do you want war? Do you care? Do you have your own intellectual opinions? Or does someone else think for you? I believe we all need to be aware of our surroundings. We need to think, feel, and react to the things in our environment. War is not the answer to this crisis. As artists, designers, architects, and engineers, we have the power to shape and express the opinions in the world. You are the cause in cause and effect. So take this position of power as a gift, because with your art and your life, people will look at you and determine the seriousness of your work, even if you don't. So please welcome my friend Dominique Chen. He'll be speaking next. Thank you.
Hello. My name is Dominique Chen. I'm an international student, senior year from France. So, but I'm also very grateful to the U.S. education. So I'm going to talk on behalf of both countries. So I'm going to read a passage from of an essay from the Egyptian weekly Al-Ahram, written by Edward Said, whom I believe is one of the greatest American intellectual nowadays, along with Noam Chomsky. They'll summarize a shareable feeling and thought on what is going on today in the world. So I'm going to read the passage. As someone who has lived within two cultures all my life, it is appalling that the clash of civilization, that reductive and vulgar notion so much in vogue now, has taken over thought and action. What we need to put in place is a universalist framework for comprehending and dealing with Saddam Hussein, as well as Sharon, the rulers of Myanmar, Syria, Turkey, China, and a whole host of those countries where depredation are endured without sufficient resistance. Demolishing houses, torture, the denial of a right to education are to be opposed wherever they occur. I know no other way of recreating or restoring the framework but through education and the fostering of open discussion, exchange, and intellectual honesty that will have no track with concealed special pleading or the jargons of war, religious extremism, and preemptive defense. But that, alas, takes a long time, and to judge from the governments of the US and the UK, its little partner, wins no votes. We must do everything in our power to provoke discussion and embarrassing questions, thereby slowing down and finally stopping the recourse to war that has now become a theory and not just a practice. What Said is pointing here, education, open discussion, and exchange through intellectual honesty can really be applied to art, which is also a way of exploring the world freely without depending on violence. Unfortunately, some of the leaders of the greatest country in the world are thinking the opposite way, appealing to the use of weapons when a peaceful discussion is really possible. This is why I'm so glad and reassured when I see such open-minded activities, such as the U.S. Department of the Art and Technology, and I hope they will let us all know how art can deploy its power against violent actions, discourse, and ideology. I believe they are one of the few true speakers of freedom who are keeping this country's ideological health safe. So we are very pleased to introduce to you Mr. Randall Packer, Secretary of the U.S. Department of Art and Technology and head of the Experimental Party. Please give him a warm welcome.
We will face our dangers squarely, and we will face them unafraid. Based on the antagonist.
I think art is the most important thing in the world. Like next to, like human understanding and compassion. But artist sort of has this unique ability to grab their imagination and run with it. I think artists definitely can change the world. Artists have changed the world.
They exemplify the peace and the creativity, what's possible
They're the eyes and ears of people who feel like they have no time to look or see or hear or do.
Blue and purple.
No, it's pink.
It's definitely very pink. It's a male-female thing. I almost love pink.
Traumatic reality is the wave of the future.
Is it the wave of the future?
The wave of the future.
We get the video on, some video input from visual jazz, I can start making sense. Right? Okay, one moment while I update your data. Let's see, and okay, looks good, looks good.
The artists are always engaging across the broad spectrum.
Art is a reflection of what's going on in society at the time. It's a reflection of the frustrations or anxiety or joy that happens to be at that moment, at that time and space.
And we need to bring forward the rest of humanity. That's our duty as artists, to bring them forward. Yes.
Utopian idealism, and an active role for the artist in reshaping public policy, particularly in these times of crisis. Do nothing less than the appropriation of the U.S. government. And we will confront corporate control of mass media so that a new century is spared new wars. And we will provide unity for the extension of new technologies into the social sphere. And we will support those artists who wear the scars of being on the wrong side of digital divide. As we begin the 21st century, the U.S. Department of Art and Technology is now poised to transform our art, our government, and our culture to the dissolution of reality. I say, virtualization remains the greatest power on earth. None of us doubt that with visionary guidance, collective agency, and hard work, we shall bring about the rebirth of society through the union of all artistic media and its potentialities. Virtualization is the international expression of our times, the great rebellion of aesthetic mobilization. May you lead our steps in the righteous path of the suspension of disbelief. Tonight, I am proud to say, in this great city of decadence, indulgence, and data, ich bin ein Berliner Künstler. Thank you. It is a great honor to meet with you here at this crucial moment in history to consider the dangerous state of humanity. We gather in this chamber deeply aware of decisive days that lie ahead. As artists, we can serve our country in a time of great consequence. We have a duty to protect millions from a terrible and deep anxiety resulting from self-created and deadly dangers that are growing beyond our control. We will answer every danger, every enemy, every forbidden realm, and every government official who threatens our effort to call forth a spirit of change and participation that speaks for a free and experimental society. In these times of war cries and religious crusades, which appear to be leading us quickly and inevitably down the path to the day of reckoning, the 7 angels who had the 7 trumpets prepare themselves to sound. In a whirlwind of madness and horror, terror and peril, hail and fire, our faith is sure, our resolve is firm, and our artistic union is strong. Tonight, I ask you, along with all the artists of our nation, particularly the young and disenfranchised, to join me in the next bold steps to carry out 10,000 acts of artistic mediation in defense of humanity. Today, the gravest danger we face, the gravest danger facing America and the world, is the existential darkness that has possessed our government, that grips its soul. Out of fear of the unknown, pain, and death, the gods, surfacing from the immemorial depths of time and space, they could use their lethal weapons to bring down fire from the heavens, death and destruction that devours us all. This threat is not new. The artist's duty is all too familiar. Throughout the 20th century, the avant-garde has attempted to construct temporary settings of life and their transformation into a higher, passionate nature. In each case, the only valid experimental approach is one based on the uncompromising critique of existing conditions and their conscious intervention. Once again, artists are all that stand between a world at peace and a world of chaos and constant risk resulting from the threat of our government inaction. Once again, we are called to defend the principles of humanity and the hopes of all mankind, and we accept this responsibility with humility, honor, and compassion. The U.S. Department of Art and Technology and the newly activated Experimental Party, the Party of Experimentation, is making a broad and determined effort to confront these dangers. We have called on our staff, along with the Global Virtualization Council, to fulfill its charter and stand by our joint resolution to authorize the use of our acts of artistic mediation, which I announced at the U.S. Capitol in Washington, D.C. just 3 months ago. In all these efforts, our purpose is more than to follow a process. It is to achieve a result. We must introduce everywhere a revolutionary alternative to the ruling culture. We must orchestrate, through criticism and propaganda, illusion as a revolutionary weapon, the most progressive artists and intellectuals of all nations, in order to put an end to these terrible threats to the civilized world. All artists have a stake in preventing sudden and catastrophic attacks, and we're asking them to join us, and many are doing so. Let me be clear. The course of our resolution does not depend on the decision of others. Whatever action is required,
whatever artistic mediation is necessary. Scramble your fabricated news in with actual news broadcasts. Use cut-up techniques that could swamp the mass media with total illusion. We will defend those concerned with the fate of our world to invent explosive material to toss into the political, economic bunkers. 12 years ago, George I faced the prospect of being the last casualty in a war he had gambled on to win re-election. To spare himself from defeat, he tried to disarm Iraq of all weapons of mass destruction. For the next 12 years, Saddam Hussein has systematically made a complete fool of 3 administrations. 3 months ago, the U.S. Department of Art and Technology and the Global Virtualization Council gave George II his final chance to give up trying to stop Saddam through military action. Bush has revealed instead the principles of arrogance, abuse of power, personal gain, and a frightening lack of charisma through his contempt for the opinion of the world. Our job as artists is to ensure that the Bush regime is disarming. It is up to the administration to show exactly where it is storing its weapons, lay those weapons out for the world to see, and destroy them as directed. Nothing like this has ever happened before. According to intelligence reports, the U.S. Department of Art and Technology has concluded that George W. Bush has somewhere in the vicinity of the Persian Gulf 500 Air Force attack radar jamming and support planes sufficient to unleash 3,000 precision-guided bombs and missiles, enough to topple a nation in shock. Intelligence also concludes that George W. Bush has high-powered microwave weapons that could flash millions of watts of electricity to cripple Iraqi computers and equipment sufficient to shut down city services like water and electricity, and enough to subject millions of people to water poisoning and electrocution. Department intelligence estimates that George W. Bush has the capability to fly troops in, drop on, and attack dozens of separate targets simultaneously, and then chew his way through Baghdad, mile by mile, inch by inch. In the opening hours of the campaign, Navy and Air Force jets, including B-2 stealth bombers, each carrying 16 one-ton satellite-guided bombs, and B-1 bombers, each carrying 24 one-ton bombs, would attack a vast range of targets. Exclaimed one unidentified Pentagon official, "This is not going to be your daddy's Persian Gulf War." And finally, what makes this picture significant is that we have human sources on the ground who have corroborated that movement of weapons of mass destruction has occurred at this site. So it's not just the photo, and it's not just individuals seeing the photo. It's the photo and then the knowledge of individuals being brought together that make our case. Clearly, the President of the United States is not disarming. To the contrary, he is applying brutal diplomacy and systems of espionage to achieve his aim, to liberate the world from the forces of evil and darkness. From our intelligence files, we know, for instance, that while Secretary of State Colin Powell is appealing to the UN Security Council to pass a resolution to go to war, the director of the CIA accompanies the secretary in order to intimidate him. Year after year, George I and George II have gone to elaborate lengths, spent enormous sums, taken great risks to build and maintain countless weapons to destroy Saddam. But why? The only possible explanation, the only possible use they could have for those weapons is to dominate, intimidate, humiliate, attack, and destroy. With a full arsenal of weapons, George W. Bush could fulfill his family's ambition of conquest in the Middle East and create deadly havoc in the region. And the American people must recognize another threat, the most deadly threat of all. Evidence from intelligence sources and secret communications, none of which we can reveal, contain statements by people who are now suggesting that George W. Bush has indulged in fantasies while viewing classified tapes of atomic explosions, which we fear might culminate in execution, orgasm, and nuclear holocaust. Before September the 11th, many in the world believed that George W. Bush could be contained, but the exploitation of death, fear, and destruction is not easily contained. Imagine those satellite-guided missiles with nuclear warheads, now aimed by George W. Bush. It would take one soldier, one finger, one button, one missile fired into Baghdad to bring a day of horror like none we have ever known. Something like a great burning mountain thrown into the sea, turned to blood, followed by thunder, lightning, and earthquakes. We will do everything in our power to make sure that day never comes. Some have said we must not act until the threat is imminent. If this threat is permitted to fully and suddenly emerge, all actions, all words, and all recriminations would come too late. Trusting in the sanity and restraint of George W. Bush is not a strategy, and it is not an option. Thank you. And tonight, I have a message for the citizens of America. Your government is not ruling your country. Your government is surrounding the globe. And the day Bush and his regime are no longer in power will be the day of your liberation. If ever there was a time for our great nation to get down on its knees and pray, there is no question in my mind that that time is now. Our Undersecretary for Homeland and Economic Insecurity, Abe Golem, has pleaded to me, Mr. Secretary, I propose that what comes after nations, what comes after borders, is something we are only beginning to understand in a political, economic, and social context. For what comes next, Mr. Secretary, is empire. But let there be no misunderstanding. For the safety of our people and for the peace of the world, we will recruit members to the Experimental Party's USA Exquisite Corps to participate directly in creative acts of freedom, of association, and the transformational properties of the ceremonies of art. We will lead a coalition of the willing to stage 10,000 acts of artistic mediation in order to disarm him. Sending artists into battle is the most profound decision a secretary can make. The technologies of art have changed. The risks and suffering of art have not. Tonight, I have a message for the men and women who will keep the peace. Members of the nation's and world's artists. Many of you are assembling in your studios and lofts, and some crucial hours may lie ahead. In those hours, the success of our cause will depend on you. Your training has prepared you. Your aesthetics will guide you. You believe in a model of society where free and experimental modes of conduct will prevail, and yes, we will prevail. The liberty we prize is not America's gift to the world. It is the artist's gift to humanity. Of the promise of utopian aspirations of the avant-garde, we must advance experimental behavior, hyper-political propaganda, and the construction of new environments. May the artists guide us now through 10,000 acts of artistic mediation across the nation and around the world. And may we continue to intervene in the actions of the United States government through nothing less than the power of virtualization and the suspension of disbelief. Weapons that change consciousness could call the war game in question. For according to Andre Breton, perhaps the imagination is on the verge of recovering its rights. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Secretary Packer.
So, if there are any questions, I'd be welcome to take them. And then I'd like to have a few minutes with any students here, or anyone here who would like to get involved with the experimental party. So, are there any questions? Yes.
I was just going to ask you, since I'm not an American citizen, if you can recruit foreign citizens in your experimental party, or is that possible? Or?
Yeah, absolutely. This is a party that is born from the American political system, and the whole point of the project is to open it up to people from all nations, all ages, and it's actually a way for people from other nations and other countries to actually have some input into our political process. So absolutely, yes. Yes, Peter.
Mr. Secretary,
Yes.
Mr. Secretary, your program is exciting and admirable, and at the same time, or as a result, strikes me as undermining, even subversive to the purposes of the very administration which appointed you to the department, and which you thus purport to serve. I can only applaud your evident subversion in the cause of a higher vision. I'm only concerned that the administration would seek to suppress these acts of expression on your part. I've seen what they've done with more prominent secretaries, such as Christy Whitman of the EPA, and even Colin Powell in some of his earlier expressions where he was reined in. How are you able to fly below the administration's radar?
Well, that's been the success of the project so far. But actually, I welcome a dialogue with the administration and with the government. I mean, that's, since moving to Washington, D.C. 3 years ago, which is how this project came to be in the first place, it was my intent to develop a structure in which a dialogue can actually take place between the artist community and those in power. And I think that this is really one of the goals of the project, is to actually bring them into this critique that we're interested in. So, but fortunately, the president hasn't said any bad words to me yet, and I haven't been fired. But as soon as he finds out about the project, that may that may change.
I imagine funding would then have to come from other sources.
Yeah, probably. Although funding hasn't been an issue so far.
Well, I wish you great success in that, and if I can be of any assistance. It also reminds me of the circumstances under the Nixon administration, particularly in his first term, where he proved to be the president who provided up to that point the greatest support for the arts from the federal administration.
Mm-hmm.
But there have been greater ironies that we've lived through and hope to live through. So,
yes. So, are there any other questions?
Yeah, I have a question.
Yes.
How did your party react to the covering up of the Guernica image?
Oh. Well, it's interesting. We haven't put out an official response to that just yet, but I think that's very interesting. You know, that would occur, and because I think that, I think that it's so critical for the artist's voice to have the opportunity to speak out. And when you suppress that voice, you suppress the last hope for any kind of sense of humanity. And I think that right now, with what's going on in the world, that it's absolutely critical that we hear from all voices, and particularly the artist's voice. I think that it's a very serious situation that we're in right now, and all seriously, this project is meant to raise our attention to the seriousness. Maybe living inside the Beltway, perhaps I have a slightly different perspective, but as a result of taking this message out to various parts of the country, I really hope to, raise our concerns from the arts community about what's going on in the world right now. And I'd be curious to know if anyone has any thoughts about this. Is there anyone here who feels that as an artist that there's anything that you can do to have some voice, to have some input into what is becoming truly a catastrophic situation in the Middle East? I don't know, how are people reacting to what's going on right now? We are on the verge of war, and it's a war that really nobody wants, except for a few people in power. Yeah. Dominic. All right, Teresa.
I was going to say, I know that I heard from somewhere that in this era, there's actually more people involved in political activity more than the hippies, the 50s and 70s during that era. And it's just funny because people are actually doing these activities, but somehow like the media and the other powers that be seem to block the message from getting across to the world. So I think people are doing it, but I don't know why it's getting blocked and cut off. That's what it seems like to me.
I think the message is getting out there to some degree, but it's being overshadowed by very fast-moving events, and I think that that's perhaps why it doesn't seem as though this message is coming across. You should come to Washington and join the government. Yes.
Here in Los Angeles, we're actually speaking through the voices of Hollywood, and Hollywood actors are mobilizing to speak out against war, and I think the Department of Art and Technology should really look into linking with these high-profile actors who are really looked at as idols, because ultimately art and technology, what we're focusing on, is still very much a kind of a marginal art form. It's not exactly in pop culture in the form that we're focusing on. So I would like to put forward my idea. Once again, we had this discussion in our cabinet and there's some disagreement about it, but I think Hollywood is really important to engage.
Yeah, well, I agree, and I'm aware of it's called Artists Against the War, I believe, the coalition that they form. But I also think, though, that it's unfortunate that only the Hollywood movie stars are being heard, that other artists who are working more on the fringe in the art world, as it were, are not heard, or at least perhaps not speaking up. I don't know, but
well, it's really about the size of the audience. That's the bottom line. The number of people that see a Hollywood movie, such as Recruit, right? The Recruit is huge compared to Bill Viola show, which is very high profile, but still,
Yeah.
it's pretty much limited the audience size.
No, I absolutely agree. I just think it's unfortunate that because of that only they can speak. I think that's what's unfortunate about that. Yeah, Peter?
Mr. Secretary and Ms. Undersecretary, it occurs to me that the solution to this not only is to engage the presence and the voices of these Hollywood stars, these celebrities, but the talents of those who do not have that kind of profile. I think that this is the understanding I'm getting from the activities of the department and the experimental party, that it is the works of art themselves that can be the most persuasive devices for in establishing discourse and providing education. Parallel development with which I'm sure you're familiar and perhaps with which you're in touch is the Poets Against the War network, created entirely by email.
I'm just going to grab a chair 1 second. Keep going.
I'm forgetting the name of the poet. One of several who was invited by the First Lady to participate in a confluence of poets in Washington, D.C., ostensibly to discuss the work and to react to the work of Emily Dickinson, Walt Whitman, and Langston Hughes. In a broadcast today on National Public Radio, this organizer and several participating in his network, none of whom, of course, has the pull of Martin Sheen or other Hollywood high-profile stars, discussed why they came together and turned out upwards of 35,000 poems to date, militating against the war, not in simple recapitulation of the activities of the Vietnam era, but furthering them for the purposes of our own. The use of the internet and of email to create this network is a very good case in point.
Well, I wanted to actually get back to what you were saying about the artists speaking through their work, because I think that is really the essential to. I have a wireless here. I think that's really essential to what we're doing, because whereas perhaps the Hollywood movie stars are speaking out, vocally, but I think that the idea of this project, and particularly with the experimental party, is to provide, an umbrella for artistic activity to be used to express a collective vision of what society could be, and particularly right now in this post-9/11 era, where we really need to hear from the artist, and it's a way to hear from the artist through their work. I think that's essential. That's what defines what I'm trying to do with this project. And I think that there are a lot of young artists and art students, like these two right here, who are very passionate about what's going on, and they need a platform to speak from. And so that's my hope, is that can come about.
And the party and the department can exploit the fact that there are actually, technically, more platforms than ever before.
No, there are infinite platforms. Yes?
Is there any interaction or participation with other countries, especially Iraq or Israel and Palestine, and artists within those communities? Because I think since we're all American, we understand what's happening within our interior. It's not always so clear what's happening in the interiors of those other countries. And I would say, Israel's definitely always on the brink of civil war. Palestine's an absolute mess. And Iraq, I'm sure, has its own stories. Is there any interaction artistically with those countries?
Well, not at this point, but perhaps you would like a position in the department, because I think that this needs to happen. I mean, you have to remember that this essentially is an art project that is taking this form, that is designed to trigger and perhaps enable those kinds of activities to occur. I mean, to tell you the truth, our State Department is supposed to be doing that. And they do to some degree, but very little. They're supposed to be encouraging cultural exchange between the U.S. and other countries. That's why we have cultural attachés all over the world to promote this kind of cultural exchange. But it's something that occurs within the government. It has nothing to do with the arts community. It's all government activity. And so that's why this country needs a Department of Art and Technology. I mean, other countries, particularly in Europe, have cultural departments where they really work hard to do exactly what you're talking about. And so we need that kind of activity. So we really need, but it has to be done on a grassroots level. I mean, it's just, because it's never going to happen really within the government. So I'm just trying to encourage people like yourself to have that kind of, to carry out that kind of activity. And perhaps it could be done within the context of this, of the Department of Art and Technology. It would make a lot of sense, yeah. Oh, back here, and then Viveka.
What's your department's position on the possibility that the administration would approach you to like harness media arts to further its own ends, like in the forms of like propaganda and stuff?
Well, they already are.
And what's your position on that?
What's my position on that? Well, I think we have to appropriate, and we have to take it back. I mean, the government is very actively involved in using information technologies to disseminate propaganda about what it's doing, and we have to do the same thing. And in the case of this project, I mean, this speech that I gave tonight was, I don't know if anybody recognized any of the text. Some of you, how many of you recognized the text of the speech? Well, it was Bush's State of the Union with a lot of, pardon? Yeah, how many of you watched the State of the Union? Wow. Wow. It was a war speech. The State of the Union was a war speech. And so, now you could go to the White House website where they have the State of the Union, and they have the video streaming, and there's a lot of information there. And they're very actively involved in using information. And of course, they have, for example, the Carnivore Project, which is a project of the FBI, where that they're using to do packet sniffing of the internet, where they can track communication through the internet, and they can spy on what's going on in cyberspace. And there's actually a group of artists in New York, Alex Galloway from Rhizome, who has taken this software because it's public domain and turned it over to artists who are using it to do visualization and all sorts of interesting aesthetic projects with their information technology. So I think that's another example of this idea of taking it back and reusing it for our own purposes. Yeah. I'm sorry. Then
I'd just like to say, I also feel that there's other issues surrounding the voting process, and no one's discussing that. It's like that whole problem of how this current administration came into power has still been unresolved. And since there's so many people who are very unhappy about the administration, what can citizens do about changing that?
Actually, we're working.
It's only going to get worse.
We do have a project within the Experimental Party that is approaching or commenting on that. We're one of our artists, Jeff Gates, who lives in Washington, is creating an alternative ballot for the 2004 election, and we're going to be hosting our own ballot for President of the United States. And part of the reason for this is to ensure that our candidate is on the ballot. And because our candidate, we haven't made the official announcement yet, so I won't go into that, but we will have a candidate for President of the United States from the Experimental Party, and we will be staging our own ballot. And we hope to get a significant number of votes, actually, by, first of all, reforming the balloting system, by putting it on the web where really it should be, where people have access to voting. And helping to reform what you're right, it's never been resolved. The last election, I think, has left a lot of people with a very bad taste for this administration. Oh yeah, well of course 2002 also, yeah. But particularly 2000, I mean that was devastating for a lot of people. Viveka.
Well, I was wondering, as your party gains momentum and grows, to what extent you think if it's during the Bush administration, the Bush Jr. administration, whether you think that they may try to co-opt you by reappropriating your appropriation, and what the impact of that might be.
That would be the most. Yeah, I'm already mic'd, but that would be the most wonderful grand finale I can imagine. I love that, and it kind of reminds me of, it's this idea of remixing, and we're working on a number of press releases that are taken from the Washington Post and then remixed and then sent out, and then the Washington Post is about to do an article on this project, and they're going to be recycling some of what we took from them, remix, and then put back into the Post again. And so, but I think this is it would be a wonderful thing if that were to happen. That's way beyond any expectations that I would have, but I think it's wonderful.
But the idea would be I would assume, would be to defuse the social impact, the political impact of the work that would come out of the party. So,
but if they began to appropriate from the Department of Art and Technology and began to incorporate our language into their language, then we have succeeded. We have entered into the system and we have permeated it, and we have really transformed it. And that's the idea. This project is an opportunity to insert the artist's voice into the system and like a virus, and let it emerge and let it work its way through the system. And if they in turn are taking from us, and we don't even need to be, they can just take it and put it right back in again. I think that could be very successful, actually. I don't know.
Perhaps you could call that project Recombinant USA.
That's very good. Exactly. Anybody else? Yeah, Richard.
I'd just like to know what resources there are presently on the web for these projects. Now I realize there is experimentalparty.org, and I've been to the department's website. But have you been building in, say, link pages to various related projects and so on?
Well, one thing, actually, there's one thing that we're doing that's coming up next, and for those who want to get involved, is that we're setting up what we're calling We the Blog. And it's a national blog for artists. And I assume everybody here knows what a blog is, right? Everybody not know what a blog? Okay, everybody, you're all familiar with blogs. So this will be a critical information resource. It'll be kept up by the principal artists in the party. It consists of myself, Mark America, Mark Napier, Lynn Hirschman, and Jeff Gates, and a number of others who are involved with the project. And we will be keeping sort of a running commentary of our thoughts and ideas about the project. And those who become members will be able to log on. They'll be able to read these postings and be able to respond to them. And in turn, it is our hope that a lot of young people, a lot of people are out there keeping their own blogs, that this kind of dialogue, sort of like an online panel discussion, that this kind of dialogue will work its way into the blogs and online discussions that are taking place throughout the arts community. And it's really a way, and then of course that becomes interrelated and linked and so forth. So you really have a national discussion going on among the arts community. So that's one way.
And one thing that occurs to me to help disseminate these connections is to, in our emails, to put the URLs for these things as part of our signature line. In fact, right. I believe I'll do that tonight when I get home. So that way, rather than overtly telling people, go check this out, through the repetition of our personal communications, we can present this information.
Well, that's a
to
great
allow
idea.
people to link.
If everybody had it in their signature. Aye, aye, aye.
It should also be kept in mind that in French, blog means joke.
Really?
B-L-A-G-U-E, blog.
I thought it was plaisanterie.
This is an alternate. There are nuances that divide them, but it's the same range of meaning.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that.
You could look it up.
Anybody else? Yes.
What is the next stop on your tour to promote the 10,000 acts?
I'll be in Boulder, Colorado in 2 weeks, the home of Mark America, one of our artists, and of course his alias, Abe Golem. I don't know if anybody recognizes. How many of you recognize Abe Golem? I don't know if any of you are familiar with Mark America's work and his online novel called Grammatron, but Abe Golem is the info shaman and now turned political activist. And he's being, maybe I'll leak a little information here.
You're streaming it, by the way.
But Abe Golem, who is a digital avatar and the alias of Mark America, is going to be running for president of the United States as a candidate for the Experimental Party. But this is going to be actually officially announced in the Washington Post in a few weeks. And so we haven't made a public announcement yet, but this is sort of...
And who would be the vice president?
Well, that's an interesting question, actually. Well, that's a possibility. She hasn't agreed yet. But then Abe hasn't even announced his candidacy officially yet, and he's just now forming an exploratory committee. So, but we are going to stage an unconvention in New York City next summer. And the Experimental Party will have an unconvention next summer in which we will officially nominate our candidate. The first digital avatar, by the way, to run for president.
I would nominate a woman, but that's another story.
No, I think you're right. Perhaps you.
Maybe. Anyway, thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much.
Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. Thank you. Thank you. And if there is anyone here who would like to, know a little bit more about how to get involved in the project, I'm happy to, I'll spend a few minutes